Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are here today with Guy McPherson, dialing in from New York, and Michael from Bellingham, Washington. I'm Jamin Shively from Cleveland Heights, Ohio, and we are here today for a conversation and update with Guy McPherson. Guy, how you doing today? Great to see you.
Good, thank you. And we can actually have this conversation with the good telecommunications infrastructure in this country, as opposed to the 27 months I was in Belize when it was sketchy at best for us to get together.
Yeah, remember those good old days. Remember them well. And Michael, how you doing today?
Doing well. Glad to be here with Guy, and looking forward to getting to some of our questions.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, let's kick it off. The big question of the day is, what's the latest with abrupt climate change, and kind of the whole big picture. And Guy, being the world's authority on this, we turn it over to Guy. I'm going to mute my microphone, and Michael, there you go. Thank you, and take it away, Guy. And feel free to kick it back. Let's just make it a roundtable discussion.
Sure. The big news is this paper from Scientific Reports, the peer-reviewed journal literature. And this is the title: Co-Extinctions Annihilate Planetary Life Doing Extreme Environmental Change. And by extreme environmental change, the paper refers to a global average temperature rise of 5 or 6 degrees Celsius within the next 90 or so years. So that's viewed as extreme environmental change, is 5 or 6 degrees Celsius. This is in the journal Scientific Reports, and it was published November 13th of 2018. And what's important here, and this is from the press release, the extinction of plant and animal species from extreme climate change could lead to a domino effect that annihilates all life on Earth. Think about that. So we're not even talking about the catastrophic uncontrolled meltdown of the world's 450 and change nuclear power plants. That's not necessary. All this required is a global average temperature rise of what they call extreme environmental change. What I would call is basically locked in a number considerably higher than that in a much shorter period of time. So this is the most horrific news I've ever seen with respect to abrupt climate change. And it doesn't come as a tremendous surprise, except that it was published. It was published in Scientific Reports, a very significant outlet in the peer-reviewed literature. So that's interesting and exciting. And before that came out, on September 10th, 2018, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres said we have until 2020 to reverse course, or we would trigger runaway climate change. Now, this is an addendum to a relatively long history of similar conclusions, going back to 1965, when the chief of the American Petroleum Institute said at a meeting of that organization that we have very little time to turn this ship around. That's 1965. And then, of course, in the mid-1980s, we have Carl Sagan and Al Gore, very young versions of Carl Sagan and Al Gore in the mid-1980s on the floor of Congress, followed by James Hansen in 1988 in Congress, basically describing the situation we're in now and indicating that this is what's coming unless we do something very different. Then we have the chief of the New York office of the United Nations Environment Program in 1989 saying we have 10 years to reverse course. And then we have the United Nations Advisory Group on Greenhouse Gases in October of 1990 saying we have to hold warming below 1 degree C above the 1750 baseline. Here we are at 1.73 degrees above the 1750 baseline. And all of these warnings that we have received have gone basically ignored with respect to taking any sort of radical action, and have led to the situation that we're in now, where we've triggered literally dozens of self-reinforcing feedback loops, or so-called positive feedbacks, and threatening our own extinction, along with, as I already indicated from this recent scientific paper, all life on Earth. So the new news, the update, tags on to the really dire news I've been presenting for slightly more than 10 years. And as you've come to expect from me, it's all bad. It's all bad, and then we talk again in another 2 weeks, and then it's even worse. Now, how could that possibly happen? And we talk again in a month, and it's catastrophically worse than the last time. Apparently, I'm getting good at this.
And it's all your fault, Guy. So,
I know.
Now, one thing that's interesting that jumps out about, the elimination of all life on Earth, I didn't hear anything about the nuclear power plants in that paper itself. Go back 250 million years ago to what was it, the Permian extinction, where 90% of species or something got wiped out, and we had a massive 9-degree centigrade temperature rise. But even then, of course, some life persisted, and then
Exactly.
life bounced back. So what's different about now?
Two things. The rate is far more rapid than what was observed in the post-Permian event. So the forecasted rate of the rise of global average temperature going forward is an order of magnitude faster than occurred then. That's the first thing. The second thing is that we are already on track with that global average temperature rise, and as you might expect, the rate of extinction is about an order of magnitude greater than it was then. So, I've been talking about rate and the importance of rate for years now, and conservation biologists know that that's what really matters. If we come out of an ice age, for example, and the glaciers retreat, and they take hundreds or thousands of years to leave bare a spot that was covered with ice, what that means is that the trees can keep up, and the other vascular plants can keep up with that rate of change and can sort of migrate behind the glacier. But we're talking about a change that rapidly outstrips the ability of all organisms to keep up. In addition, this domino effect that they mentioned refers to the reliance of species upon other species. So just as I've mentioned several times in our conversations, that we depend upon a living planet for our survival. And, I've named some of the species that we depend upon. The water filter organisms that filter our water and give us clean water, and the pollinators that pollinate the crops so that we're able to eat, and on and on. It's not just about what we eat, it's about what we eat and how it gets to the point that it can be eaten that matters. And so this domino effect leading to annihilation is a major element in this latest journal article. And up until this point, people have been reluctant to talk about domino effects and self-reinforcing feedback loops. And so the idea of co-extinctions is relatively new. And that's the first word in the title here, is co-extinctions. And so that's new, the idea that species are going down together, that we're as a living planet, we're all in the Titanic together, as it were. And so that's important. The other thing that's important is the title of this paper, including the word annihilate. To my knowledge, only the second time a peer-reviewed paper has included the term annihilate or annihilation. The first one being by conservation biologists Ceballos and Paul Ehrlich and colleagues from about 2 years ago with their paper, the second paper second paper on the sixth mass extinction. I believe it was in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. So co-extinctions, domino effect, annihilation, leading to loss of all life on the planet. Those are key elements here that have been largely ignored in the journal literature so far.
So I've noticed, Guy, that this year the news coverage on climate change has been quantitatively, if not qualitatively, different from, say, last year, and certainly from the last, decade. So it's interesting that at the time when belatedly a lot of people are starting to talk much more openly about climate change, and that it's receiving much more news coverage, that in the academic and scientific fields, this kind of language is for the first time percolating to the top. So it looks to me like this is penetrating the culture in a way which it hasn't to previously. And of course, the Laudato Si of Pope Francis is yet another indicator of that. That didn't come out this year, but the fact that the Pope of the Catholic Church is seemingly making this a top priority. What is your sense of why this is coming to the fore now? And is there, and does that bespeak any kind of opening for radical change? I know these are two very different questions. One's in the sociological realm. But anyway, what would you say to this moment?
Yeah, I think that it's becoming so obvious that people who deny anthropogenic climate change or deny climate change going on in real time have been largely discredited, because you only have to walk outside. You only have to have been in a particular place and paying attention for a few years to know that something different is going on this time. And then there has been quite a bit of media attention paid to things like the California fires, because it's in California and there are all those homes and money at stake. Volcanoes and volcanism has been connected to climate change. And I'll explain that here in a little bit. And occasionally the media actually makes that connection. And so if you're in a volcano zone, if you're in an area where a volcano is affecting you, and then you hear climate change, you go, what? What's that? And so you're making the connection. And then there's the pretty well-known at this point insect apocalypse that began with a report out of Germany, and specifically on nature preserves in Germany, indicating an enormous number or amount of insects had been eliminated within the last 27 years. And so that sort of set on its own for a while. And then a second and subsequent paper came out based in Puerto Rico, reporting an equally dire situation in Puerto Rico. So it's not just in nature reserves in Germany, it's on the other side of the planet, in the Western Hemisphere as well as the Eastern Hemisphere. And the insects are being wiped out in enormous numbers. And I think most people are aware at some level that we really need the insects for things like pollination and cleaning up the air. There's so many things that the little organisms do for us. And so you get those kinds of reports and people connecting the dots, even the media dots, in significant ways. I think that's why we have much better acceptance and understanding and more media reporting, and that becomes a self-reinforcing feedback loop of its own. If ABC News, for example, reports on the insect apocalypse and MSNBC doesn't, then people are going, well, they must not know what's going on over there at MSNBC. So they're sort of playing catch up with each other. Now, the volcanism is important. I mentioned it briefly. There's something called isostatic rebound, and this occurs when you have two planetary plates adjacent to each other, and one of them is covered with ice and one of them is not. So let's say, for example, this is the North American plate and this is the Pacific plate. And the North American plate has a bunch of ice on it in the form of glaciers. When it warms up, that ice gets melted and flows into the Pacific Ocean, the Pacific plate. And so as a consequence, the North American plate rises. It's lighter than it used to be. Thus the isotonic rebound, the rebounding up. And the Pacific plate actually gets heavier. Water is heavy. And so what that means is there's a lot of friction going on right here at the boundary between those two plates. And that's why that's been linked to earthquake activity and to volcanic activity. The ring of fire around the Pacific Ocean is on fire, in part because of climate change. And so if you live in one of those places like Hawaii, where suddenly there's a big show all the time now, you're starting to take notice. And this is a case where, you know, Hawaii isn't contributing a lot of melted water to the Pacific Ocean, but it's something happening a few thousand miles away on the North American continent, and that's where the water is coming from. So I think it's a combination of all these things contributing to greater awareness and greater reporting of climate change. And I suspect and fear that it's like you're noticing the dog that you ran over only in the rearview mirror. You know, that we're seeing all these outcomes now. And I think that's because they're symptomatic of something that has spun out of human control at this point. But I think that we shouldn't act as if this case. We should act as if we can take positive actions to prevent the worst case outcomes.
So in a sense, these are lagging indicators. And, you know, you speak often about these, you know, self-reinforcing feedback loops. There's also social feedback loops, the ones that you're mentioning now, but they lag way behind the physical and biological feedback loops. We connect the local with the global, you know, so belatedly, because in fact, those connections are happening all the time, not only when we first, you know, notice them.
Right, right, absolutely. And at one level, that's perfectly understandable as a species, because for our entire existence and even for our great ape predecessors, our ability to predict the near future was based on our understanding of the recent past. And that's what it took to survive, was an understanding of the recent past, not the deep past. And what that assumes and requires is a linear rate of change going forward, not an exponential rate of change going forward. And now that we are in the realm of exponential change, this is what I said I was afraid was happening, and that I think is happening. It's the dog in the rearview mirror, you know, that we heard the bump and we realized, oh, we sort of messed that up, didn't we?
Yeah. Now, Guy, when you talk exponential, whether it's exponential temperature rise or exponential rates of extinction, from study of exponentials, you know, you have kind of like this flat period, then you have the characteristic knee of the exponential, after which it essentially goes vertical. Where would you say we're on that exponential trajectory, and how long until, like, I mean, in a way, just like you said, you just have to walk outside. Here I am in Cleveland, Ohio, where my whole dad's side of the family is from. So I know the area very well. Normally on New Year's Eve, we've got inches of snow on the ground and sub-freezing temperatures. This last New Year's Eve, I could literally walk outside in my t-shirt. It was 61 degrees Fahrenheit at midnight. And it was just ridiculous. Flowers are blooming that shouldn't be. It feels like springtime. And so, you know, so my question, are we there now? You know, kind of like, where are we, and how long until things go from really, really bad to really, 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 really bad?
Yeah, that's a great question. And when I say that's a great question, it almost always means I don't really know the answer. For years, I've been saying that we're in the early stages of exponential climate change, maybe somewhere along here. And what it would take to drive us to here, for example, is something like reduction in industrial activity leading to loss of global dimming and therefore a rapid rise in global average temperature. in a span of weeks or so, or maybe an ice-free Arctic Ocean that would take us from here to there. But I think both of those are locked in, unfortunately. We don't know the timing. So that's what makes this difficult. I'm not exactly sure where we are on the curve, and it's hard to say how far we need to get along before it ensures the demise of this set of living arrangements, the ability to grow, store, and distribute grains at scale, before we're locked into no habitat anywhere on planet Earth for Homo sapiens. We don't know. Those are things we don't know because this is all new. An ice-free Arctic is an all-new phenomenon. We are right now at the highest temperature experienced by Homo sapiens in our 300,000-year history. This according to a paper in Earth System Dynamics by James Hansen and colleagues from 2017. So, here again, I think that we're on this track, that it's irreversible. And again, I think that we need to act as if, in the spirit of Rosa Parks, acting as if she had every right to sit in a certain bus seat. I think that we need to act as if it will make a difference, and again, not be attached to the outcome, because I think we can't make a difference, and I think that it's our moral obligation to attempt to make a difference. Now, that said, that leads straight to the conversation about geoengineering, spraying the sky. That's being done experimentally right now by David Keith from Harvard, with support apparently from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And all of the evidence I've seen, which includes synthetic works from the United States National Academy of Sciences and a European body of similar stature in 2015, all that work, including the synthetic work, indicates that solar radiation management, which is the category that geoengineering falls into, is almost certain to make the situation worse in various places around the globe. The atmosphere is capable of holding a certain amount of moisture, and causing or encouraging that moisture to fall in a certain place means it does not fall in another place. So there's a moral issue here, a social issue, as Michael brought up a short time ago. This is a social issue. Even if we can cause it to rain in the Great Plains of the United States so that we can ensure the grain production for a little longer, and we know that that will almost certainly cause a decline in precipitation elsewhere on the planet, such as in Central America, where people have become refugees already, then should we? What's the moral imperative here? And I think that's where we're really in uncertain terrain here. We don't even know what the hell we're doing.
Yeah, I'd like to, if I'm not interrupting, love to
Go. Yeah.
give my own answer to that, which is, so obviously with geoshading, if we were to deploy geoshading at some massive scale and forcibly, rebalance the heat load on Mother Earth so that we're not, continually adding heat to this, to our system, but reflect away a percentage of that. Obviously, it's going to have, lots of different local effects and whatnot, decreasing rainfall here and there. But I see those local effects as much more manageable in the following way. If we look at it holistically, if we look at the planet as a whole and humanity as a whole, and we say, look, if nothing changes, nothing changes, and we continue on this exponential rise, we're all going to die. So what I think would be better, just to put it right on the table, is let's do the geoshading. Let's brace ourselves for all these local changes. And if we cause droughts in Central America, let's send food and water down to Central America in tanker ships or whatever is necessary to keep those people alive, or let them migrate north or whatever. But let's co-manage both, Mother Earth and the heat load on the whole, so that life on the whole can be sustained. and simply brace ourselves and and come up with a whole new set of agreements, international agreements and agreements within humanity of how we're going to take care of each other and not let whole populations perish because of the local effects. Because I think the global is that's the biggie. If we can't put the brakes on accelerated warming, we're all going to perish. So let's put the brakes on it and let's brace ourselves for the consequences of that. Love to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
Go,
well,
Michael.
I'll just reiterate that the social nature of these problems seem to me, at least perhaps until a certain tipping point, which we may have already passed, is really where the rubber meets the road, right? It's not even the technological fixes per se. Now, after a certain point, Jamin, perhaps what you're saying is really the last desperate lunge, with a technical fix, and then let the social fallout be what it will. But largely, these are social imperatives that we just haven't had the wherewithal to fulfill.
Yeah, this gets into the sort of ethical terrain that is worthy of a national conversation or an international conversation that I don't see anybody having. When the governments of the world and the corporations of the world won't even admit that we're in the midst of a climate emergency, then how can we expect there to be a conversation about what to do and what the impacts are for us, for them, whoever the them is, whether it's people on the other side of the planet or organisms with which we share the planet. So this is, for me, this is one more major disappointment in my life as an ecologist and a field biologist, is the disconnect between science and the political conversation that ought to result from it. Apparently politicians have no problem speaking about the ethical dilemmas associated with, say, dropping nuclear bombs on various parts of the planet. And yet the outcome of abrupt climate change is equally profound, perhaps even greater, because dropping a nuclear bomb means the near-term death of hundreds of thousands or maybe millions of people. We're talking about billions here. We're talking about all 7.7 billion people on the planet. And we can't even have a conversation. We can't even have the public conversation between heads of corporation and heads of state about what we're doing.
I'm so, if I may, I'm so glad you put it in those terms. You mentioned twice heads of government and heads of corporations. Okay, the government sector and the private sector, where that leads to exactly what I and colleagues are doing these days, which is we are preparing a massive campaign and outreach to the heads of the religious sector around the world. And, just to mention a couple prominent ones, you have Pope Francis of the Catholic Church with his groundbreaking encyclical Laudato Si on care for our common home. You have the Prince of Wales, soon to be King of England, and therefore the head of the Church of England, the first big Protestant church, which, in a very real sense leads the Protestant faiths around the world. So these are folks who don't have to worry about re-election, and don't have to worry about money, and don't have to worry about a lot of things that heads of governments and heads of corporations have to worry about. I see heads of governments and heads of corporations as extremely constrained by many, many different factors. So we are, just in a nutshell, our proposal to the world is religious leaders come together and lead humanity in precisely this conversation, because my faith is that with the technology that we have, and I won't I won't make a shameless pitch for radical collective intelligence, but with the technology we have the potential for an exponentially growing level of human intelligence at a collective scale using artificial intelligence, using the entire information and communication technology networks and systems that we already have. Combine that with humanity entering into a planetary conversation, and we have the potential for exponentially growing intelligence with which we can model and map out myriad different scenarios and solutions for caring for the planet, doing geoshading, caring for Central America, and caring for all the regions that would lose water and rainfall in the short term, and look at it holistically and come up with a holistic solution. But we need someone to take the lead on this. Someone other than, a crackpot like Jamin Shively, who, a few hundred people listen to. We need leaders who hundreds of millions, or in the case of these major religions, billions will listen to kick off a planetary conversation, a phase transformation, a phase transition, if you will, from all of us being so fragmented and isolated in the current paradigm of me and mine, and this is my property and my house and my this and my that, to, hey, this is all of us in this together.
Yeah, and we need to start that conversation last week or last month or last year. Time is very short, and the warnings have been coming for a long time. There's an essay I wrote a couple or 3 months ago. There's a direct link from the homepage at Nature Bats Last called Extinction Foretold, Extinction Ignored. And I go through the warnings we've received all the way back to George Perkins Marsh in 1847. 1847. Up through the first Referee Journal article, April of 1896, by Svante Arrhenius, went on to win a Nobel Prize in chemistry. And right on up through the ones I mentioned earlier, Al Gore and Carl Sagan, and the list just goes on, and we have ignored these warnings. And if you're actually paying attention and keeping track of the number of times we have ignored an elementary danger, then you might grow a little disappointed by what you view as our prospects this time. So yes, even if it is too late, we must start. We must start immediately with a sense of urgency on this topic. This is, without question, the most important topic in the history of humanity. We're talking about how much longer our species goes beyond our 315,000 years that we've been on the planet. Do we get another 100,000 years? Do we get another 100 years? Do we get another 100 days? What could be more important than this issue, especially when you wrap it up with how much time does complex life on the planet have? How much time does any life on the planet have? Based on this paper from Scientific Reports, it might not be long at all.
When you mentioned Rosa Parks, that moved my imagination. We're talking here about world leaders standing up and speaking out. And arguably Pope Francis has done his part, right, with publishing the Laudato Si and pushing for the discourse to go in this direction. But we can't wait for leaders. Rosa Parks, out of a sense of injustice, and as you said, Guy, without overthinking the consequences, to herself, did it out of a sense of justice, of rightness, et cetera, that we would all now agree with, so it's hard to say how these kinds of changes in the cultural realm come about, but surely it comes about with sort of spontaneous eruptions of what we could call public protest or civil disobedience or what you will, when it comes down to it, when people are desperate, and we are desperate.
And we're seeing that now in France with the Yellow Vest movement, in England with Extinction Rebellion. So we're seeing people actually rising up and demonstrating their concern, academics of all people, among the most conservative people on the planet, willingly getting arrested and thrown in jail just to bring attention to the matter of climate change. So this is something different. There is no question about that. Whether there's world enough and time, as the expression goes, remains to be seen.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge the lawyer in New York City who set himself on fire to make a statement about climate change and the lack of human response. And so, I've certainly done. Michael and I have both done, lots and lots of traveling and campaigning and public demonstrations, me wearing Darth Vader costumes and big signs about abrupt climate change and the Death Star and all that on university campuses. We did a whole month-long campaign on the Microsoft campus trying to get the tech sector rallied. But of course, the tech sector is a subset of corporations. And I was extremely discouraged to see zero response from the tech sector to this campaign that got everyone's attention on the Microsoft campus. Every Microsoft employee knew about us, was talking about us, and no one did anything. And that's what finally pushed me to have a conversation with my colleague, Jamie Gilchrist, who's hosting me here in Ohio. And we said, what's it going to take? And we started speculating about it. And we said, well, what about religions? And at first, the hypothesis, well, religions are going to be yet another barrier because, the churches of the world, the religious leaders are just going to say, well, all there is to do is pray, and it's in God's hands now. And, even less of an impetus for action or collective action. And then we said, wait a second, but Pope Francis, he wrote this book. All of us heard about it back in 2015. All of us who were paying attention and, glanced at it and said, well, that's nice. But we actually dug in and read it. And it is the most amazing radical document. So that got us on this whole new trajectory that we're on right now to systematically invite the world's religious leaders to come together, form, a coalition, a council. I mean, you can imagine, look, there's a website called Interfaith Power and Light where something like 18 major religions, everything from Catholic to Baha'i to Quaker to Presbyterian to Muslim to Buddhist, all make statements about climate change, very hard-hitting statements that it is urgent, the time is now. So we're basically saying, all right, how about y'all come together? A few dozen religious leaders come together, form a consensus, and launch a world tour and media blast and have a platform where people can come. See, that's this gets back to the radical collective intelligence platform that we've also been building. People need a place to go. Going to Manhattan on a Saturday and screaming and yelling, wearing signs and getting arrested, that's, like a firefly, a burst of light and then all dark again. We need a place to go to actually build something, right? Beyond all these fragmented conversations, this is a great conversation, but it's boom, yet another blip, yet another fragmented conversation. And maybe a few hundred or a few thousand people will watch it. And a bunch of hecklers get on and post some comments. Thank you very much. That was super helpful. Nothing changes. That's what I'm saying. We need something organized. So that's why we're going after organized religion and an organized technological and communication platform to get people together and actually build something new.
Yes. And of course, as a scientist, I'm the person in the least likely position to facilitate that, the creation of conditions that would further that conversation. And and it's almost embarrassing because scientists didn't used to be like this. Scientists used to be pragmatic actors as well. You think about George Perkins Marsh, for example, the first person I know about who brought attention to climate change as a result of burning fossil fuels. That was in 1847. He was a naturalist, so he was out there studying the natural world, and he was an ambassador for the United States. He was doing those two things. Rachel Carson, of course, is well known for her 1962 book, Silent Spring. She was a government employee. She worked for the United States government. And she wasn't afraid to write books intended for the general public, pointing out the horrific nature of the kinds of things we're doing to the planet. And I don't see a lot of that anymore. You know, the compartmentalization, the silo effect within disciplines on campuses seems to have been severely ratcheted up since Rachel Carson, and certainly since the turn of the last century when Arrhenius was getting his paper published. And so it's tragic. I can point to a handful of people who have done work on climate change and attempted to get that message out to the public. Paul Ehrlich was a hero for the environmental movement when he became a broadcaster for one of the big three television outlets at the time in the 1960s and 1970s. And he was going on the air once or twice a week giving the environmental report. And when was the last time you saw somebody do that? Much less on a regular basis. So it's these kinds of heroic actions by people who refuse to be locked into a silo and instead step out and try to bridge the divide, as you're attempting to do, Jamin, the divide between religion and science, the divide between evidence and celebrity culture, society in general. Those are the bridges that have been burned, it seems to me, over the course of the last few decades, and that instead should have been reinforced that entire time. It's tragic. And, as with you, I'm not willing to sit back and let this happen without some sort of struggle, at least without raising the alarm to inform people of what's going on in the world. I mean, do we not at least have a moral responsibility to do that? You know, if the asteroid's coming at planet Earth, do we cover it up until it strikes? I don't think so.
No, and Guy, you are one of my heroes for all the work that you're doing and for bridging all these different disciplines and conversations and having the courage to step out into the void and have these conversations seemingly on a daily basis. You're always publishing new stuff. The 3 times that I've invited you to come to be a guest speaker at a Sierra Club dinner in the San Francisco Bay Area, you've traveled thousands of miles and never asked for 1 penny of stipend. And that's extremely rare. So I want to acknowledge you for being one of those bold leaders. And we need for all these bold leaders to come together. We need unity. We need to come together, and that's what we've been struggling to. All of us have been struggling to put together to get out of the fragmentation into this space of unity. And our latest effort is with the religious sector. I'll keep everyone posted on. And but we got to do it.
Well, yeah, and that's great. I think appealing to the religious sector and attempting to get beyond that are critical steps. Absolutely.
All righty. Well, I know we're up against getting close to the end of our time right now. No pun intended. Any last words, Michael, Guy, before we wrap up today?
I want to just reiterate that what we face is a moral imperative, probably the greatest moral imperative we have ever faced as a species. Are we going to take action? Are we going to take actions that are not detrimental to some parts of society, to some demographics, at the expense of continued privilege, continued position, continued gains by other segments of society? I think this is at its core an ethical issue that demands the coming together of every sector of society That's it. I mean, that's all we're asking is everything all at the same time. And not to take it lightly, this is huge. This is a huge undertaking, and the stakes are everything. It reminds me of, I think the movie was No Country for Old Men, and he goes into a remote gas station, right? And he says, "We're going to flip a coin," and the guy behind the desk is like, "For what?" "For everything." That's what we're doing. This is for everything. And so far, we haven't even been willing to flip the coin. We haven't even been willing to have the conversation about what the coin means.
We as humanity, some of us have, notably
Right.
the three of us, have repeatedly had the conversation, but how do we get the rest of humanity together? That's the big question.
Absolutely.
For a conversation. We're not asking everyone to come with your checkbooks and just dump all your money. Just have a conversation. That's the starting point.
To be or not to be, right? heads or tails.
And that's the point we're at.
That's it. That's it. All righty, gentlemen, I want to thank you both for a wonderful conversation today, for taking the lead, for being bold. And humanity, we invite you all to join us. So stay tuned and join with us. Join the conversation.
Thank you, Jamin, for bringing us together again.
You're welcome. Thank you, Guy. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
All right, gentlemen. We'll see you next time. Have a great day. Thanks.